It's wonderful to see the restoration work that's happened to the environment.
It's a great resource for school groups and community groups to get involved.
Kids who ride to school use this track every day.
It's just a fantastic trail.
I think it's something that'll be there for the community forever.
The Yarrowee Trail is 16 kilometres long, and it runs from the north of Ballarat right through to below the main urban area. So it runs through a great variety of environments, and that's part of its attraction.
When I talk to people, I talk about the forest and what great horseshoes of forest we've got in Ballarat, and this links that, and it actually takes people from their suburban houses out to those forests and to get out to enjoy it.
Well, the Yarrowee Restoration Project, it's the biggest environmental project to have happened in Ballarat for over 100 years. And that's been a real challenge because when the work was initially envisaged, what the community was facing was a river valley completely clogged by the remains of mining, the mullock heaps, the silt, just an area full of weeds, and that for over 100 years had been used as a dumping ground and been totally neglected.
Gold certainly made Ballarat. It made Ballarat what it is today, all the beautiful buildings and the city that it is, but it left its legacy. And the legacy really was incredible degradation that occurred, right from the very early days. The trees were removed from the landscape, mostly to timber the mines, particularly once they went underground in some of the deeper mines, and also to stoke the boilers and so on. And then river valleys just churned up landscapes. In later years they came back and got the finer bits out, and finally the Chinese miners really picked it through, worked it all through. And then in the 1930s, in the Depression, it was churned over again, a lot of people out of work. So the landscape's really been turned over more than once, and it's been incredibly degraded, and essentially what we're looking at here is a landscape of degradation.
The project started in 1982, really. That's when you can trace it back to its earliest beginnings. And as these sorts of projects can do, it started in a rather informal way, just with an idea.
I had a group of students at Ballarat and Clarendon College, and we're doing something on Buddhism. And in that philosophy, you plant a tree to look after. So I planted trees for all the kids in my class. Luckily, we had a fellow out at one of the nurseries who had all this root-bound stock, and he said, take it. So Saturday afternoons we'd come down, dig holes, plant trees, didn't matter what we were planting, anything. We weren't really doing it on grounds for any ecological grounds, it was just to work up a thirst.
In those days it was just more a bit of fun and to work up that thirst, but then we sort of start thinking a bit more serious about it. This is the Yarrowee River. It's the main river going through Ballarat, which is a large regional city.
Yeah, sort of the lungs of the city, people use those expressions, but I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have just a forest coming along on this? Almost went right into town. Now, to see the runners come down, the people with their dogs, the whole thing, and the trees keep growing, and to look at them and say, gee, I was only a young guy when I planted that tree. Now it's 30 feet tall, and it's habitat for birds and possums and all the rest of it.
And we formed ourselves into a residents group as concerned residents of this area, because we could see its importance in the north-south corridor for wildlife around Ballarat, and we managed to get a tremendous response from the public. We filled to standing room only the local public hall.
Well, the children from Mount Clear Primary School often walk down to the secondary college, and one day as they crossed the bridge they saw all the blackberry and gorse and the rubbish in the creek, and they said, oh yuck. So we decided to have a clean up, and the parents came with chains and four-wheel drives and pulled out the blackberry and gorse, and we started tree planting in 1990.
Ballarat can lay claim to the fact that the Australian Trust for Conservation Volunteers, now Conservation Volunteers Australia, started its work in the early 1980s on the Yarrowee, and you can see some of those original plantings there now. More recently, we've had a partnership, that is the city, with the Australian Koala Foundation, and the foundation has done quite a lot of revegetation work on different areas along the Yarrowee and some of its tributaries, and in doing that has brought tourists from overseas to come here to help us with our work, and they're doing that because those people want to protect the koala. The early work of the volunteers led to the development of a project to restore the whole Yarrowee River corridor. Part of that project was the production of a master plan for the corridor, but the overwhelming success of the project has come about as a result of the support of our partner organisations who have put tremendous resources and energy and support into the project. The project's been developed with the involvement of bodies such as Central Highlands Water, the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority, the Department of Sustainability and Environment, and the Environment Protection Authority. And all of these bodies, together with the community, have contributed an enormous amount of resources, support and financial resources to the development of the trail network.
I can recall standing at Eel Station Park overlooking the Yarrowee River, talking to a really enthusiastic group of people telling me about their 20-year plan to reclaim the Yarrowee River and the tributaries, and we said, well, let's cut that in half, and we were able to do that, fortunately, and since that time we've contributed a lot of planning time and in excess of $1 million towards the project, and we don't regret spending 1 cent of that.
It's much more than just the funding that those partnerships bring. It's very much about a sense of togetherness in the community amongst the key agencies and the community at large, getting together to deliver a project like this.
And it really started with the development of the Ballarat Region Conservation Strategy in 1991, when the idea of having a network of trails was first developed. That then flowed on into the creation of what's called the Links Strategy, that strategy being all about the development of linear reserves, and that was developed in 1995, and immediately out of that came the Yarrowee River Master Plan, which has really been the basis for the development of the trail network.
More water flows basically going in there.
In about 1996, the Lakes and Waterways crew was created, and that crew's been the backbone, to a large part, of the whole project by doing a lot of the heavy work.
We got called the water rats because mainly because we got sent into all the water and that to retrieve all the rubbish. We got all the messy jobs to go into the mud and everything.
Jobs no one else wanted to do.
That was about it.
Getting the students involved is a really rewarding aspect of the work that we do. Be able to teach the kids about biodiversity, water quality, and why we do the tree planting is a very important aspect, and that follows them through life.
We're trying to bring in more native trees so we can attract more native animals.
It'd be good if it was all really clean. They'd be able to have more fish.
Back in the 1980s, when the project first started, we were pretty good at planting trees and gum trees. Since then we've become a lot more sophisticated, and through our Indigenous Plants Nursery we now grow everything from aquatic plants to semi-aquatic plants to right through to trees, but grasses and shrubs, all indigenous to the area. And part of the exercise is to go out and collect seed, which is then stored in our local seed bank, and then we grow on that seed.
As you can see, if you have a look in here, that the significance of the channel, all the stonework and that's here, and that's why we had to be conscious on what we planted along the channel for the historical significance for the city. We had to plant native grasses, sedges and small shrubs along these form channels. If you use any sort of large eucalypts, the roots eventually push the stones out on the channel, and there was a major work in fixing them.
Also, in tandem with that, has been the removal of willows, which were planted along the river to try and stabilise the banks as a result of all the gold mining activity. And that's fine in one sense, they do that job of stabilising the stream banks, but willows do have a number of significant environmental problems associated with them. One of the main impacts that willows have is to actually choke the stream, and this site up in Brown Hill is a good demonstration of that, where the stream bed itself has spread out quite considerably as a result of being choked by willows. The willows also drop a great deal of material, twigs and sticks and leaves, that result in the willows spreading and also in adding a lot of nutrient into the waterways, which takes oxygen out of the water and therefore depletes the aquatic life in the waterways. And that's one of the main reasons why we're progressively working on replacing the willows with indigenous species. We've found it harder to actually fix up the waterway itself, and we've spent quite a lot of time over the last few years doing that by building wetlands and putting in gross pollutant traps, even improving our street sweeping within the streets of the city to improve the overall appearance and quality and environment of the waterway itself.
The water quality has improved because we've now made it a bit more diverse for things to live here. Instead of just snails and worms, we have other things like mayflies and stoneflies back in the top of the catchment. They're the things that the fish eat and the platypus eats. A platypus needs to consume about 250 grams of these little guys each day.
People can now walk right along the length, and because they can see what's going on, they're concerned about it and they're demanding higher standards. And we're happy for that, because as a water authority we want rivers to be healthy, we want good quality water, and we want an educated population. This does it all.
Now, all of the land along the Yarrowee River and its tributaries is Crown land, and it's really quite an extensive reserve. However, it's not always been clear what the boundaries were, and what we had to do was to survey those boundaries in a number of cases, and that did raise some interesting surprises. Land that we either thought was Crown and wasn't, and vice versa. Also, there were areas along the river, particularly above the city, that were subject to licence or occupation of one sort or another. So that involved a fair amount of negotiation with those people who were occupying the reserve at that time, particularly for grazing purposes, and of course that meant that access to water was quite significant. At times those negotiations were interesting. Inevitably, in a case like this, people are concerned, if they're adjoining neighbours, as to the nature of people who are going to use the trail, whether they're going to leave gates open or cut fences, annoy stock, that sort of thing, and also concerned about the loss of area that they may have occupied for quite some time and had almost been regarded as their own. But the negotiations were worked through very well and very constructively and positively, and we now have very good relations with adjoining landowners along the trail throughout. And in fact, what we're finding is that those people are very important in advising us about any aspect of what might be happening along the trail, whether there are issues of vandalism or fallen trees or any issue at all about the use of the trail. By any standard, the Yarrowee Trail project has been a major community project. There's been over 400,000 terrestrial plants, trees, shrubs, grasses, ground covers planted over the last 10 to 12 years. More than 300,000 aquatic plants in the wetlands that have been constructed and along the river itself. There have been more than 4,000 people involved, representing more than 90 community groups over that period, over that last decade. And they've been involved in 576 events of one sort or another. And the outputs from all of that effort have been the creation of the 16 kilometre long Yarrowee River Trail, a further 20 kilometres of trails along the tributaries to the Yarrowee, and a number of large wetland systems, of which the Yarrowee Redan is a major one of those. It's a $750,000 project which involves the construction of a number of individual cells that treat the urban storm water that comes from South Ballarat down the Redan Creek and down the Yarrowee River itself. Midway along the Canadian Creek Trail is the new Canadian Lakes Estate, and this has been designed using water-sensitive urban design techniques. Some of the approaches that have been adopted in the estate include constructing wetlands to treat the storm water coming off the estate before it enters the Canadian Creek itself. The wetlands have been incorporated into the Canadian Creek Trail and into the nearby parklands. And this has become a major feature. Some of the residential development that's being built is actually faces out onto the wetlands, and the trail itself runs right through the estate. So it's an excellent example of a partnership in developing an improved public facility as well as adding to the value of a new residential estate. This is the sort of approach that we're seeing develop in other parts of Ballarat in association with the trail network. We're here at the North Gardens wetlands, which has been established about 5 years, and they've been here long enough now to see how a lot of the plantings that have taken place have actually developed, and also the regeneration which has occurred from some of the existing vegetation, such as this old swamp gum that was here before the wetlands were built. And what we've seen progressively is seedlings coming off those old trees growing to quite a substantial height after only 3 or 4 years. A factor that wasn't taken into account in the first revegetation works was that of sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. As we've become more and more concerned about climate change, we've realised that the revegetation works are important in terms of absorbing carbon, and we've estimated that about 1,150 tonnes of carbon are absorbed out of the atmosphere each year by the works that have been done. Several pedestrian bridges have been constructed along the trail, and these have an open steel mesh for ease of maintenance and drainage. However, what we discovered was that dogs didn't like walking across this decking, so we had to come up with another solution, which we did by simply putting a flat sheet steel section along the length of the bridge, which the dogs quite happily walk along and cross from one side of the stream to the other. It's now got to the point where it's being discovered. I guess the nice thing is that more and more people are finding out about the network and realising that it's there and using it more and more extensively in their daily lives. And this is very important because a lot of recent work that's been done on community health, both physical health and mental health, has shown that getting out into the natural environment, walking, relaxing, taking things easy, enjoying the ambience of being out and about is very, very important to people's overall well-being. And this is the sort of feedback that we're now getting about the project.
To have trees beside the trail give us a great buffer between the houses and the bitumen roads, and it's like running in a forest because you've got trees, and obviously the oxygen is just a great environment for us to be running in. So we've actually incorporated a lot of the trails into our runs now to access the forest further out. So for us it's been a beautiful way to meet in the city and then explore the forest via the trails.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen more and more of a frequency of visitors looking for something to do other than the major attractions, and they are looking for walking trails or cycling trails. In the last year at the Visitor Information Centre, we have started hiring out bicycles. That's really taking off, and certainly the likes of the Yarrowee Trail is something that we're finding visitors are enjoying more and more.
An emerging area is the idea of community groups and individuals adopting sections of the Yarrowee and its tributaries. Of course, when it was weed infested and a really nasty place to go, if you your property backed onto the Yarrowee, you really didn't want to know about it, or you dumped your garden waste in it. Now that it is such an asset, people are coming to us and saying, well, we'd really like to look after this section.
Well, this has been transformed, of course, from what was an eyesore into something that's rather beautiful. And like once upon a time, many people wouldn't want to live beside the Yarrowee Creek. But now, we've combined heritage with infrastructure development. Lots of people are wanting to live there. It's cleaned it up, and people are seeing it as part of history.
If you're going to have an area that is not only improved but sustainable into the future, you do need to have that community ownership. People in Ballarat now feel that they own this area, they're proud about it, and that means that they'll ensure that it's protected not just now but right into the future.
The Yarrowee River Trail starts at the Gong Gong Reservoir Park up in Brown Hill, just north of the main Ballarat urban area. And that park is managed by Central Highlands Water and has within it quite a variety of forest plantations. So that's where the Yarrowee Trail starts and actually branches off. It then comes down through an area of native forest, particularly on the western side of the river, and through a series of small reserves, including one named Ricky's Quarry. Ricky's Quarry was a hard stone quarry that was developed in the 1960s and operated for about 20 years. It now contains a delightful little wetland area which is frequently full of frogs and other variety of fauna. We then come down further along the river, again through a forested environment where a lot of revegetation work has been carried out over the last 4 to 5 years, past a lot more of the revegetation work which is really booming at the moment. It's been highly successful. The atmosphere along the trail varies a lot as well. You go through areas that are very tranquil, where you can, well, you don't have to walk at all if you don't want to. You can just sit and experience the atmosphere. You can hear the birds in the trees, see them. You can go down to the water and look at the different aquatic environments, the plants that are growing there. You can hear the water running over the rapids and just experience that typical bushland waterway environment.
G'day, how are you?
Around across Ditchfield Lane, we move into an area which, in times of heavy flow down the Yarrowee, actually operates as a retarding basin. And you walk through an informal section of the trail there through to the Ballarat bypass. And the bypass wall, it actually operates as a dam wall to create the retarding basin that's on the Yarrowee at that point. There's also a tunnel through the bypass embankment, and the trail runs through that tunnel. Once you come out the other side, the environment changes significantly. You go past the Brown Hill Reserve, which is one of the significant sporting reserves in Ballarat. And again, there's extensive revegetation work having been done, particularly where willows have been removed and steadily replaced by aquatic and riparian revegetation works. You go past one of the created wetlands that's been built at a little place called Narina, and that's become a very popular spot for people to picnic and watch birds. Continue along and go below Black Hill, about half of which was dug away during the gold rush days, and a lot of the mullock used on all sorts of projects around the city. So you get a very, very clear view of the devastation that was caused. Travel through to Peel Street, which is where the trail along the river terminates. Then you come to the centre of the city, where the river has been put in a big bluestone channel. And of course across on the western side of Peel Street is the very historic Eastern Oval, which was created by diverting the Yarrowee River. So originally the Yarrowee would have pretty well run right through the middle of where the Eastern Oval is now. To continue along the trail, it's really necessary to walk south along Peel Street through the Bridge Mall, where of course you can stop and have a coffee or a general rest and refreshment, through as far as the Canadian Creek. A major feature of the waterway network through Ballarat are the bluestone and brick-lined channels. These were constructed during the early part of the 20th century, and one of the best examples is here at the confluence of the Yarrowee River and the Canadian Creek. It's also where the Yarrowee Trail and the Canadian Creek Trail meet, heading south along Yarrowee down towards Sebastopol. Whilst it's not really the natural river, you really do look at this work in awe. The quality of the workmanship, the effort that was put into building these bluestone channels in the days when the Yarrowee was called a sludge channel because it was so eroded, so degraded, massive flooding problems, massive health problems. This was the response to just simply deal with this issue. To continue south along Anderson Street past the very historic White Flat Oval. Crossing over Hill Street, enter the Yarrowee Flora Reserve. Now this is where the Yarrowee project really has its earliest beginning. And nature is starting to do the work of restoration of the waterways and the reserves itself. It's a very picturesque reserve and is a tribute to the people who did that early work from the 1980s onwards. You'd go underneath the Press Street Bridge, and again the character of the trail and the Yarrowee corridor changes significantly. Come past the Yarrowee marshes and around past the Yarrowee Redan wetlands, which are a a terrific example of a modern water quality treatment system that incorporates lots of natural attributes. It's full of aquatic plants. Continuing south from there, you come to Ewell Station Park. The wetland itself is named after the Ewell cousins, who were the first white settlers into Ballarat, and they arrived in the district in 1838. So it's a very historic site, and until recently Ewell Station Park was where the trail finished. We've extended it another 2 kilometres, the trail that is, in the last couple of months, and that goes through more revegetated areas and links up with trails that go through to Sebastopol and Buninyong, and a part of the overall network of trails that are right throughout the city.
It certainly seemed the right thing to do, to follow the tradition of calling the community together to attend a great community work with the sound of a trumpet.
I'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of this land, the Watharon people. When you're walking, have a look around, because it's marvellous what you see. And just have a look and have a listen, and you'll feel the spirit of this place, and you can feel it here today.
Going back to looking at what the Indigenous people thought of it, because it was clearly an asset for them in their daily life. And in that sense, it was a real joy back on the 1st of March 2003 to actually have a formal opening of the trail here in Ballarat, and to see the people who turned up there and how much they appreciated the work that had been done, and to realise that they were obviously going to enjoy it for years and years thereafter. And on top of that, then to be nominated as one of the national finalists in the River Prize Award as part of the annual River Symposium in Brisbane, and to be a national finalist on behalf of Victoria in the National Landcare Awards in 2004, where it's being recognised at that sort of level on a national scale.
To see over a period of years the whole thing being done systematically and being done properly. It's here to stay now, and it just is a wonderful asset.
I think we've turned the corner. It's no longer a drain, it's a valuable river that the community can enjoy.
The birds have come back, there's fish in the river, there's people using it, just general good feeling about the whole place, to see it getting used, and no, it's just been really good.
Starting from just 2 or 3 people with an inspiration, with a vision for what could be done to the city, to now having thousands of people involved and appreciating it and using it, makes it extremely special. And it's the sort of project that, you know, will resonate, if you like, throughout the community for forever.
What I'd like to see would be kangaroo grass. Just this whole sort of area just planted out with kangaroo grass. That'd be magnificent.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jack. The kangaroo grass would set this off.
Well, it'd be that high, wouldn't it? That's natural colours of more the browns of the bush, rather than this is a bit, it's all right, but a bit English.
Yeah.
Parkland, isn't it?
A bit parkland like.
But that'll be the next step.
Be another project.
Another project. Another 20 years, yeah. Another 20 years I'll be in my late 30s. Yeah.
Yeah.